The gray sky hung like a lead shroud, heavy with low clouds that concealed the dying sun. In the open field near the forest's edge, a woman's body lay fallen in the snow, her pale skin stained crimson. Beside her, the sacred ritual interrupted. Runes scratched into the earth seemed to pulse with a dark energy. Hildr Eriksdottir, the young Volva of the clan, knelt over her, heart beating erratically, a terrible revelation etched in her eyes. The secret that should never have been unearthed. What ancient ritual concealed, and who would pay the price? If you enjoy stories that reveal the dark secrets of the Vikings, stay until the end. 24 hours earlier, Hildr awakened to the cutting wind whispering through the cracks of her wooden cabin, her body wrapped in furs dampened by the sweat of restless sleep. At 28, she served as the Volva, the priestess and seer of the Skeldarson clan, guardian of traditions and interpreter of the god's will. The icy breath of morning invaded her space, mingling with the strong scent of burnt herbs and smoldering firewood. The smoke curled around wooden beams blackened by years of ritual fires, dancing in the weak light that filtered through the small window covered with stretched animal bladder. Hild's fingers traced the runes carved into her ceremonial staff. Each mark a memory, each curve a promise made to the gods when she had been chosen at just 13 summers. The elders had seen something in her that day, a connection to the other world that both blessed and cursed her. Now, 15 years later, that burden weighed heavier than the winter snows outside. No husband warmed her bed, no children gathered at her feet. The gods demanded solitude from their chosen ones. "The price of wisdom," she whispered, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air as she rose from her sleeping platform. Her joints ached with the cold that had settled into her bones during the night. Outside, the village would be stirring, smoke rising from longhouses where families huddled together against winter's bite. But here, in her isolated hut at the edge of the settlement, Hildr moved alone, preparing for the day's sacred work. She splashed icy water on her face from a wooden bowl, the shock driving away the last tendrils of sleep and the dreams that had plagued her. Visions of blood on snow, of shadows moving through trees, of voices calling her name from the mist. Such dreams had come more frequently as the winter deepened, carrying warnings she could not fully decipher. The preparation for the ritual consumed her morning. Hildr ground dried herbs with a stone mortar, mugwort, juniper, and yarrow, their scent sharp and cleansing. She arranged her tools on a carved oak table, the silver knife with its bone handle, the bowl made from a human skull, that of her predecessor, the bundle of yew twigs bound with hair from a sacrificial goat. Each item had its purpose in the ceremony that would protect the clan during the darkest days of winter. As she worked, her thoughts drifted to Kjell Bjornsson, the clan's leader. His face appeared in her mind, stern, weathered, the deep scar on his right cheek puckering when he frowned, which was often in her presence. He tolerated her because the clan needed a Volva, but his eyes betray his distrust of her powers. She had heard the whispers that followed her through the village, how some believed she spoke with the dead, how others feared her connection to Odin might bring his chaos rather than his wisdom. The morning light strengthened, but the clouds refused to part, casting a gray pall over the landscape that matched Hildr's mood. She secured her long brown hair in a simple braid, then dressed in her ceremonial garments. A gray linen dress worn over a woolen shift, with a wolf pelt cape fastened at her shoulders with bronze brooches. Around her neck hung the silver amulet of Odin, a constant weight against her chest, a reminder of her duty and her isolation. From the small shelf above her bed she took the runesticks wrapped in leather, each carved from the branch of an ash tree that had been struck by lightning. These would reveal the will of the gods during the ritual. As she touched them, a shiver ran through her body that had nothing to do with the cold. The foreboding that had haunted her dreams intensified, settling in her stomach like a stone. "Something comes," she murmured to the empty room, "something the gods themselves fear." Hildr stepped outside, her breath immediately crystallizing in the bitter air. The village sprawled before her, 30 long houses arranged in rough rows, smoke rising from their roofs, the sounds of daily life muffled by the blanket of snow that covered everything. Children should have been playing between the buildings, dogs barking, women calling to one another as they worked. Instead, an unusual quiet hung over the settlement, as if the people themselves sensed the disquiet in the air. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her shoulders as she made her way toward the sacred grove at the village's edge, where the ritual would take place at dusk. Her steps left deep impressions in the fresh snow, a solitary path that no one else would follow. The isolation of her position had never felt so acute. Other women her age had husbands, children, a place within the warm circle of family. Hildr had only her connection to the gods, cold companions on winter nights. As she neared the grove, the wind shifted, bringing with it a sound that did not belong to the winter landscape. A soft, muffled cry, barely audible above the rustling of bare branches. Hildr paused, her head tilting as she listened. There it came again, not the call of a bird or the whine of a hungry fox, but something distinctly human. Curiosity and concern drew her from her path. She followed the sound, moving deeper into the trees that bordered the northern edge of the village. Here, the snow lay undisturbed except for the small tracks of animals. The crying grew louder, punctuated by what sounded like frightened gasps. Between 2 ancient oak trees, their massive trunks twisted with age, Hildr found the source of the sound. A child, a boy, huddled against the base of one tree, his small body shaking violently. His fair hair was matted with dirt and what appeared to be dried blood. His clothing, little more than rags, provided scant protection against the killing cold. The boy looked up at her approach, his blue eyes wide with terror. He scrambled backward, pressing himself against the tree bark as if trying to disappear into it. A fresh wave of sobbing overtook him, his thin chest heaving with the effort. "I will not harm you," Hildr said softly, crouching down to appear less threatening. She extended her empty hands, palms up. "Are you lost? Where is your family?" The child stared at her uncomprehendingly. When he finally spoke, the words were foreign to her ears, not the language of her clan or any of the neighboring settlements. Yet something in his tone conveyed desperation and pleading. Hildr studied him more carefully. His face, though smudged with dirt, showed the high cheekbones and fair coloring common among the northern clans. But the markings on his tattered clothing and the style of the small wooden reliquary hanging from his neck suggested he came from far beyond their territories. Perhaps from one of the clans their warriors had raided the previous summer. An enemy child. The realization sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the winter air. The law of the clan was absolute on such matters. No strangers were to be sheltered, especially not those from rival clans.
Such an act was considered treason, punishable by exile or death.
The memory of the last person who had defied this law rose unbidden in Hildra's mind. An old fisherman who had hidden a shipwrecked trader from the eastern lands. Both had been executed, their bodies left for the ravens at the edge of the forest. "I should leave you," she whispered, more to herself than to the boy. "The gods know I should walk away." But as she looked at his trembling form, at the ugly wounds visible on his thin arms, and the bruising around his neck, something stirred within her, a feeling so foreign that she almost did not recognize it. Compassion. Not the distant pity she might feel when performing funeral rites or healing the sick, but something deeper and more personal that seemed to bypass all her careful training. The boy whimpered again, his small hand reaching out tentatively before falling back. The gesture broke something inside her. Without fully understanding her own actions, Hildr found herself removing her wolf pelt cape and wrapping it around the child's shoulders. "Come," she said, knowing he wouldn't understand the word, but hoping her tone would convey her meaning. "You cannot stay here. The cold will claim you before nightfall." She extended her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, the boy took it. His fingers were like ice against her palm, and she could feel the violent trembling that ran through his entire body. How long had he been out here? How had he survived? As she led him back toward her cabin, taking a circuitous route to avoid being seen, Hildra's mind raced. What she was doing could cost her everything, her position, her life. Yet with each step, the certainty grew that she could not have done otherwise. Something about this child called to her, as clearly as if the gods themselves had placed him in her path. But had they sent him as a test or a trap? The gods were known for their cruel games with mortals. Inside her cabin, the warmth of the fire seemed to overwhelm the boy. He swayed on his feet, and Hildr guided him to sit on a fur near the hearth. His eyes darted around the small space, taking in the hanging herbs, the ritual implements, the strange symbols painted on the walls. Fear flickered across his face. "You are safe here," she said, knowing the words meant nothing to him, but needing to say them anyway. She mimed eating and drinking, and his eyes widened with hope. Hildr moved quickly, preparing a simple broth from the stock she kept simmering at the edge of the fire. She added dried meat and a handful of barley, then reached for her store of healing herbs. The boy's wounds would need tending, but first he needed warmth and nourishment. While the broth heated, she examined him more closely. Beneath the dirt and blood, his face revealed a delicate beauty. High cheekbones, a straight nose, eyes the color of summer skies. The scar on his forehead was old, but the bruises on his neck and the cuts on his arms were fresh. Someone had tried to kill this child, and recently. When she handed him the wooden bowl of broth, he took it with shaking hands and drank greedily, some of the liquid spilling down his chin. Hildr watched him, wondering what horrors he had witnessed, what journey had brought him to her forest. When he finished, he looked at her with such naked gratitude that she had to turn away, uncomfortable with the emotion it stirred in her. The day passed in a strange, silent communion. Hildr cleaned the boy's wounds with water infused with yarrow and calendula, spreading a salve of comfrey and honey over the worst cuts. He winced, but did not cry out, watching her movements with wary fascination. When she gestured for him to remove his filthy tunic so she could check for more injuries, he complied without hesitation, revealing a torso marked with old scars and fresh bruises. The sight made her breath catch. No child should bear such marks. What manner of people would do this? Through gestures and simple drawings scratched in the hearth ash, they began to communicate. She learned his name, Leif, and that he had traveled far through the forest. He had been running for days, hiding from something or someone that made him tremble anew when he tried to explain. As dusk approached, Hildr faced a dilemma. She was expected at the ritual grove, but she could not leave the boy alone, nor could she risk taking him with her. In the end, she created a hiding place for him beneath her sleeping platform, concealed by furs and wooden boxes. She mimed the need for silence, pressing a finger to her lips, and Leif nodded solemnly, his eyes huge in his thin face. "I will return," she promised, touching her chest and then pointing to him. "Wait here." The ritual proceeded as planned, though Hildr's mind remained divided, part of her constantly aware of the child hidden in her cabin. She led the clan in the ancient prayers, scattered the sacred herbs over the ritual fire, and cast the rune sticks to read the gods' messages for the coming days. The signs were troubling. Hagalaz, the rune of destruction, Thoresaz, the thorn of danger, and Isa, the ice of stagnation and treachery. "The gods warn of threats from within and without," she announced to the gathered clan members, her voice carrying in the still winter air. "We must be vigilant against betrayal and destruction." As the words left her lips, a chill ran through her. Was she the betrayal the runes warned of? Was her decision to shelter the boy the very danger that threatened the clan? Or was there something else, some greater deception at work? Kjell Bjornsson stood at the front of the gathering, his massive frame draped in a bearskin cloak, his dark hair pulled back to reveal the harsh planes of his face. His gray eyes narrowed at her words, and she felt the weight of his suspicion like a physical touch. "What form will this betrayal take, Volva?" he demanded, his deep voice carrying a note of challenge. "Who among us should we watch?" Hildr met his gaze steadily, though her heart hammered in her chest. "The runes do not give names, Jarl. They show only shadows of what may come." A murmur ran through the crowd. Some made the sign against evil, others exchanged worried glances. Kjell's expression darkened further. "Then we shall all be watchful," he declared, his hand moving to rest on the hilt of his sword, a gesture that seemed more threat than reassurance. "No threat to our clan will go unpunished." The ritual concluded with the traditional sharing of mead, but Hildr noticed that fewer people than usual approached her for private blessings. The warning had unsettled them, and perhaps some already suspected that she was not being entirely truthful. She felt eyes following her as she gathered her ritual implements, and the back of her neck prickled with awareness of whispered conversations that ceased when she drew near. By the time she returned to her cabin, night had fully descended, bringing with it a bone-deep cold that made the trees crack and groan. She entered cautiously, half expecting to find the boy gone, or worse, to find someone from the village had discovered him. But the cabin was as she had left it, the fire burning low, the shadows gathering in the corners. "Leif?" she called softly, moving to the hiding place. The boy emerged, blinking in the firelight, his face pale with fear, but also relief at her return. He had remained perfectly hidden, perfectly silent. There was a discipline in that which spoke of harsh training or harsher experience. Hildr added wood to the fire and prepared a simple meal of dried fish, bread, and the last of the broth. They ate in silence, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the howl of the wind outside. After the meal, exhaustion overtook the boy, and he fell asleep wrapped in furs near the hearth, his small face finally peaceful in slumber. Watching him, Hildr felt a strange protectiveness that confused her. She had never wanted children of her own. Her path as vulva precluded such things. Yet this child, this stranger from an enemy clan, had awakened something in her that she had thought long dead. "What am I to do with you?" she whispered to his sleeping form. "The gods have placed you in my path, but to what end?" No answer came, only the soft sound of the boy's breathing and the distant howling of wolves in the forest. Hildr wrapped herself in a fur and settled on her sleeping platform, her mind troubled by visions of what the morning might bring. She dreamed of blood on snow, of a woman's body lying broken beside interrupted runes, of secrets rising from the earth like mist. And through it all, the sound of a child crying, lost in a storm of betrayal and death. Dawn broke with an unusual silence. The storm that had threatened all night had passed, leaving behind a world transformed by fresh snow and a crystalline coldness that made breathing painful. Hildr woke with a start, the dream still clinging to her like cobwebs. She reached instinctively for her amulet, finding comfort in its familiar weight. The boy still slept, curled tightly beneath the furs, only the top of his fair head visible. She let him rest, moving quietly about the cabin as she kindled the fire and prepared for the day. There were decisions to be made, plans to form. She could not keep him hidden forever, but neither could she simply turn him out to die in the forest. A knock at the door froze her in place. No one ever came to her cabin this early. It was an unspoken rule that the vulva was to be left alone until she chose to emerge. Fear constricted her throat as she glanced at the sleeping child, then at the door. "Who comes?" she called, her voice steadier than she felt. "Astrid Gunnarsdottir," came the reply, the voice of the village healer, a woman who had trained alongside Hildr in the old ways, though their paths had diverged. "I bring news that cannot wait." Hildr moved swiftly to ensure the boy was completely hidden, then opened the door just enough to see Astrid's face, round, weathered, framed by gray-streaked blonde hair partially covered by a woolen hood. The healer's expression was grave. "May I enter? The matter is not for open air." Reluctantly, Hildr stepped aside, allowing Astrid into the cabin. The older woman's sharp eyes swept the space, lingering momentarily on the sleeping area before returning to Hildr. "There is talk in the village," Astrid said without preamble. "Torsten the hunter claims he saw footprints yesterday, a child's tracks leading from the forest's edge toward your cabin. He followed them until they disappeared near your door." Hild's mouth went dry, but she kept her expression neutral. "And what does Torsten suggest these tracks might mean?" "Children often play near my cabin, despite their parents' warnings." "Not in this weather, and not alone at the forest's edge." Astrid's voice lowered. "There are whispers of a stranger in our midst, Hildr. Some say a spy from the Ravnik clan, whose village our warriors raided last summer. Others speak of darker things, a changeling or a draugr taking the form of a child." The superstition might have made Hildr smile under different circumstances. Now it only increased her danger. "And you, what do you believe, Astrid?" The healer hesitated, her eyes searching Hild's face. "I believe you would not risk our people's safety without good reason. But I also know that Kell has ordered a search of the entire village. They will come here, Hildr, soon." The warning was clear, the loyalty unexpected. Astrid had always kept her distance from Hildr, respecting her position but never seeking friendship. This visit was a risk for her. "Thank you," Hildr said simply. I will be prepared when they come." Astrid nodded once, then pulled her hood closer around her face. "The gods guide your path, Volva. May they protect whatever secret you keep." With that, she slipped back through the door, leaving Hildr alone with her fears and the sleeping boy. The reprieve was brief. Within the hour, the sound of multiple footsteps crunching through snow announced the arrival of what she had been dreading. Hildr woke life gently, pressing a finger to her lips to indicate silence. His eyes widened with understanding and fear as she quickly guided him to a new hiding place, a small storage cellar beneath the floorboards where she kept her most precious ritual items and herbs. "Stay silent, no matter what you hear," she whispered, squeezing his small hand before closing the trapdoor and covering it with a woven rug. She had just straightened when the pounding began. "Open in the name of Jarl Kjell Bjornsson!" Hildr took a deep breath, composing her features into the serene mask expected of a Volva, and opened the door. Outside stood Kjell himself, flanked by 4 of his warriors, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air, their hands resting on weapons. Behind them, a small crowd had gathered, faces tense with suspicion and fear. "Jarl Bjornsson," she greeted him with a respectful nod. "What brings you to my door with such urgency?" Kjell's gray eyes were cold as the winter sea, his scar livid against his pale skin. "You know why we have come, Volva. Step aside. We must search your dwelling." There was no point in resistance. Hildr moved back, allowing the men to enter her small cabin. They moved with purpose, checking every corner, lifting furs, opening chests. One warrior prodded at the hearth with his spear, as if expecting someone to be hiding in the flames themselves. "Your intrusion disrupts the sacred space," Hildr said, her voice carrying the authority of her position. "The gods do not look kindly upon those who violate a Volva's dwelling without cause." Kjell's laugh was harsh. "Cause? When you yourself warned of betrayal at last night's ritual? When strange tracks are found leading to your door? When you have been seen gathering extra food and speaking to yourself in the forest?" He stepped closer, towering over her. "The clan's safety outweighs your comfort, Volva. Or have you forgotten your duty to our people?" The accusation stung, as it was meant to. Hildr lifted her chin. "My duty to the gods comes first, Jarl, and they have shown me nothing that would endanger our clan. The gods speak through you, but they do not control you," Kjell countered. "Your actions are your own." The search continued, growing more aggressive as nothing was found. Hildr watched, heart pounding, as one warrior approached the rug covering the trapdoor. He knelt, his hand reaching for the edge of the woven material. At that moment, a commotion erupted outside. A woman's scream pierced the air, followed by shouts of alarm. The warrior abandoned his search, and Kjell strode to the door, his hand on his sword hilt. "What now?" he growled. One of the villagers ran up, his face pale with shock. "It's Sigrid, Jarl, Thorvald's wife. Thorvald's wife. She's been found dead at the ritual grove. Her throat cut, her blood spilled over the sacred runes." The news hit Hildr like a physical blow. Sigrid, young, beautiful, recently married to one of Kjell's most trusted warriors. What could she have been doing at the ritual grove alone? And who would commit such a sacrilege? Kjell's expression hardened to stone. When? Just now discovered. The blood is fresh. It cannot have happened long ago. The Jarl turned to Hildr, suspicion warring with the need for her ritual expertise.
You will come with us, Volva. If dark magic is at work, we need your sight. It was not a request. Hildr nodded, reaching for her wolf pelt cape and staff.
As she followed Kjell from the cabin, she cast one last glance at the covered trapdoor. Life would be safe for now. The gods had provided a terrible distraction. But at what cost? The ritual grove stood in a small clearing surrounded by ancient pines, their branches heavy with snow. In summer, it was a place of beauty and peace. Now, it held only horror. Sigrid's body lay sprawled across the stone altar at the center of the grove. Her long blonde hair fanned out like pale fire against the dark stone. Her throat a gaping red wound that had spilled life onto the snow and over the runes Hildr had carved the previous night. Around the body, footprints disturbed the fresh snow, multiple sets, suggesting Sigrid had not come alone or had been followed. The clan members who had discovered her stood at a respectful distance, their faces masks of shock and grief. Among them was Thorvald, Sigrid's husband, his massive frame shaking with silent sobs, his bearded face contorted in anguish. Hildr approached the altar slowly, her trained eyes taking in details others might miss. Sigrid's hands were clean, her nails unbroken. She had not fought her attacker. Her clothing was undisturbed, except for where the blood had soaked her woolen dress. Most tellingly, around her neck, where it had not been torn open, was a thin leather cord from which hung a small silver pendant. Hildr recognized it immediately, a symbol of Freya, the goddess of love, fertility, and war. A goddess whose worship Kjell had forbidden in their clan after his first wife had died in childbirth. Kneeling beside the body, careful not to disturb the evidence, Hildr examined the runes that had been carved into the stone altar. They were not the protective runes she had inscribed during the ritual. These were older, darker symbols, blood magic from the ancient days before the coming of the Christ god to the southern lands. Runes of sacrifice. Well, Volva. Kjell's voice broke the silence. What do you see? Hildr rose slowly, her mind racing. The truth was dangerous, but a lie might be more so. Sigrid did not come here to die, she said carefully. She came to perform a ritual, one dedicated to Freya. A murmur ran through the gathered crowd. Kjell's face darkened with anger. Impossible! No one in our clan would dare! The evidence speaks otherwise, Jarl. Hildr gestured to the pendant, then to the runes. These are fertility rites, ancient and powerful. Sigrid was seeking Freya's blessing. For what purpose? Kjell demanded, though the answer was obvious to all. Sigrid and Thorvald had been married for 2 years without a child, a source of growing tension between them. For a child, Hildr confirmed. But someone interrupted her ritual. Someone who saw an opportunity for a different kind of sacrifice. Thorvald pushed forward, his grief giving way to rage. Who would do this to my wife? Hildr looked at the footprints surrounding the altar, then at the faces of those gathered. Among them she noticed Gunnar Hrafnsson, Kjell's advisor and blood brother, standing slightly apart, his expression carefully blank. Unlike the others, his cloak showed no trace of snow, suggesting he had arrived only moments ago, despite living closest to the grove. "The killer walks among us," she said, her voice carrying in the still air. Someone who feared what Sigrid might gain from Freya's blessing. Someone who saw her devotion as a threat. Kjell's eyes narrowed. "You speak in riddles, Volva. If you know who did this, speak plainly."
"The gods do not reveal all at once," Hildr replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "But they have shown me that this death is connected to the betrayal I foresaw. The runes speak of a conspiracy that has festered within our clan for many moons, one that now begins to bear its poisoned fruit." The accusation hung in the air, unspecific, yet damning.
Eyes shifted from person to person, suspicion blooming like dark flowers in winter. "Until the killer is found, no one leaves the village," Kjell declared. "And you, Vulva, will use your arts to uncover this traitor." Hildr bowed her head in acknowledgement, though inwardly she trembled. The gods had indeed revealed a conspiracy, but not in the way anyone expected. In the runes covered by Sigrid's blood, she had seen a pattern that spoke of planned treachery against Kjell himself, a plot involving several clan members. And somehow she sensed that the boy hidden beneath her floorboards was connected to it all. The return to the village was somber, the people walking in small groups, voices hushed, eyes watchful. Hildr moved apart from the others, her mind working furiously to connect the pieces of this deadly puzzle. Sigrid's murder, the forbidden ritual, the conspiracy against Kjell, and the appearance of a wounded child from an enemy clan. How did they fit together? As they neared the village center, Gunnar Hrafsson fell into step beside her, his voice pitched low for her ears alone. "A word of caution, Vulva. Some mysteries are better left unsolved." Hildr glanced at him, noting the calculating look in his pale blue eyes, so similar to those of the boy hidden in her cabin. "The gods decide what remains hidden, Gunnar, not men." His smile did not reach his eyes. "Even the gods can be deceived by those clever enough. Remember that before you speak of conspiracies and betrayal." He moved away before she could respond, leaving her with a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. In that moment, pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Gunnar's unexplained absences from the village, his quiet opposition to many of Kjell's decisions, the strange resemblance between his eyes and the boy's. Life was no random child from a raided village. He was connected to Gunnar somehow, perhaps a son or nephew, sent to infiltrate their clan for some dark purpose. But what of Sigrid? How did her death serve this conspiracy? By the time Hildr reached her cabin, her mind was racing with possibilities, each more disturbing than the last. She entered cautiously, aware that someone might have returned to search more thoroughly in her absence. The cabin appeared untouched, the trapdoor still concealed beneath the rug. She secured the door behind her and quickly moved to uncover the hiding place. "Life," she called softly, lifting the heavy wooden door. "You can come out now." The small space below was empty. Panic surged through her as she searched the cellar frantically, as if the boy might be hiding in some corner of the small space. But there was no sign of him, only a small piece of fabric torn from his tunic, caught on a rough edge of the wooden ladder. He had fled, or, worse, been taken. Hildr searched the cabin for any sign of forced entry, but found none. If someone had discovered the boy, they had been careful not to leave evidence. But where would Life go in a hostile village? How would he survive the bitter cold without shelter? Unless he had help. Unless someone in the village knew of his presence and his purpose. Gunnar's veiled warning echoed in her mind. Even the gods can be deceived by those clever enough. The realization struck her with the force of a physical blow. She had been manipulated.
positioned as both protector and potential scapegoat. If the boy were found, she would be blamed for harboring an enemy. If he succeeded in whatever task he had been sent to perform, she would be implicated in the conspiracy. But what was that task? What could a wounded child accomplish that grown warriors could not? The answer came to her with sickening clarity as she recalled the small wooden reliquary the boy wore around his neck, identical to the one she had seen Gunnar touch absently during clan meetings. Not a religious token, but a container. For poison. Kjell was the target.
And the ritual feast to commemorate the winter solstice was tonight. Hildr grabbed her staff and rushed from the cabin, no longer concerned with appearances or suspicion. The village was in chaos, with warriors searching houses for any sign of Sigrid's killer, women gathering in frightened groups, children kept close to hearths and homes. No one paid much attention to the Volva hurrying toward the great hall where preparations for the feast would already be underway. The central longhouse stood at the heart of the village, its massive wooden beams carved with images of gods and heroes, its high roof dusted with fresh snow. Inside, serving women moved between long tables, laying out wooden plates and drinking horns, while others tended to the cooking pits where joints of meat turned slowly over open flames. Hildr scanned the busy space for any sign of the boy, but saw only the usual preparations. Kjell sat at the head table, deep in conversation with Thorvald and several other warriors, planning the investigation into Sigrid's murder. Of Gunnar, there was no sign. Making her way through the hall, Hildr approached the area where the mead and ale were being prepared. Large wooden barrels lined one wall, each marked with runes to indicate its contents. Beside them stood Gyda, the elderly woman responsible for brewing the clan's ritual mead, a position of honor and trust. "Has anyone approached the mead barrels?" Hildr asked without preamble. "Anyone who should not have been here?" Gyda looked startled by the question. "No one would dare, Volva. The Jarl's mead is sacred." "Think carefully, Gyda. A child, perhaps? A small boy with fair hair and blue eyes?" The old woman's brow furrowed. "No child has entered the hall today. I have been here since dawn." Relief washed through Hildr, followed quickly by renewed concern. If not the mead, then what? How would the poison be administered, and where was life? She moved away from the brewing area, her eyes scanning the hall with greater urgency. The feast would begin at sundown, less than an hour away. Whatever was planned would happen soon. As she passed the cooking area, a movement caught her eye. A small figure slipping between the shadows at the far end of the hall, near the private chambers reserved for Kjell and his closest advisors. Hildr changed direction immediately, moving as casually as possible toward those shadows. The narrow corridor beyond the main hall was dimly lit by a single oil lamp, its flickering light creating dancing shadows on the rough wooden walls. Hildr moved silently, her years of ritual training teaching her how to step without sound. At the end of the corridor stood the door to Kjell's private chamber, slightly ajar, a thin line of light visible at its edge. From within came voices, one deep and commanding, instantly recognizable as Gunnar's, the other higher, speaking in the foreign tongue she had heard from Leifer's lips. Pressing herself against the wall, Hildr edged closer until she could see through the narrow opening. Gunnar stood with his back to the door, blocking her view of whoever he addressed. His posture was tense, his voice urgent, though pitched low. "You were to remain hidden until the signal came. Now everything is at risk." The reply came in broken Norse, the accent thick, but the meaning clear enough.
The woman found me. I did as you taught, gained her trust, learned what she knew. And what did she discover? Gunnar demanded. She suspects nothing of our true purpose, came the reply. Lifer's voice, but different somehow, harder and more assured than the frightened child she had rescued. She believes I am a victim, not a weapon. Hildr's blood ran cold at the words.
The boy had been playing a role all along, his fear and vulnerability a calculated performance to win her protection and sympathy. And the poison? Gunnar asked. In place. When Kjell drinks the ceremonial toast, his heart will stop before he finishes the horn. The blame will fall on the Velva, the outsider who warned of betrayal only to commit it herself. Gunnar's laugh was low and satisfied. Perfect. With Kjell dead and the Velva disgraced, the clan will turn to me for leadership. By spring, we will have absorbed the Ravenkel clan into our own, and my position as High Chief of both will be unchallenged. The full scope of the conspiracy unfolded in Hildra's mind like a dark flower. Gunnar had orchestrated everything. Sigrid's murder to create chaos and distraction. The boy's infiltration to plant the poison. The careful manipulation of events to ensure that she, the Velva, would take the blame. With Kjell dead and Hildr executed as a traitor, there would be no one to challenge Gunnar's claim to leadership. She had to warn Kjell immediately. But as she began to back away from the door, her staff scraped against the rough wooden wall. A small sound, but enough in the quiet corridor. The voices inside the chamber ceased abruptly. Hildr froze, knowing discovery was moments away. She could run, but where? The corridor offered no hiding places, and the main hall was too far to reach before Gunnar emerged. Making her decision in an instant, Hildr grasped her staff firmly and stepped into the doorway, pushing it open wide. The gods see what men think hidden, Gunnar Hrafsson. Gunnar spun to face her, his hand moving to the knife at his belt. Beside him stood Life, but the boy's demeanor had changed entirely. Gone was the frightened, vulnerable child, replaced by a youth with cold eyes and a calculating expression that mirrored Gunnar's own. Velva, Gunnar greeted her, his voice deceptively calm. You should be preparing for the ritual, not wandering the Jarl's private chambers. I know what you plan, Hildr replied, her grip tightening on her staff. Kjell will not drink the poisoned mead. A flash of surprise crossed Gunnar's face, quickly replaced by a cold smile. You understand nothing, woman. The mead is untouched. The poison is already where it needs to be, and no one will suspect its true nature until it's too late. Confusion momentarily clouded Hildra's thoughts. If not the mead, then what? What would Kjell consume that others would not? The answer came to her with horrifying clarity. The ritual bread, broken first by the Jarl as a symbol of his authority, then shared among the clan. A special loaf prepared for Kjell alone, as tradition dictated. The bread, she whispered. You poisoned the ritual bread. Gunnar's eyes narrowed. Clever, Velva. Too clever for your own survival. He drew his knife, the blade gleaming in the lamplight. A pity you won't live to share your insights with Kjell. Hildr raised her staff defensively, backing toward the corridor.
"The gods have shown me your treachery, Gunnar. Do you think they will allow you to succeed?" "The gods," Gunnar laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "The gods are stories we tell children, Velva. Power belongs to those brave enough to seize it." He lunged forward, the knife slashing toward her throat. Hildr deflected the blow with her staff, the impact jarring her arms. She was no warrior, but years of solitary living had made her stronger than her slender frame suggested. "Leifr!" Gunnar shouted. "Block the corridor!" The boy moved with surprising speed, positioning himself between Hildr and the exit to the main hall. His small hand held a knife of his own, a cruel, thin blade designed for silent killing rather than combat. Trapped between them, Hildr felt fear rise in her throat. She had no illusions about her chances against Gunnar in a physical confrontation. "Leifr!" Gunnar shouted. "Block the corridor!" The boy moved with surprising speed, positioning himself between Hildr and the exit to the main hall. His small hand held a knife of his own, a cruel, thin blade designed for silent killing rather than combat. Trapped between them, Hildr felt fear rise in her throat. She had no illusions about her chances against Gunnar in a physical confrontation.
Her only hope lay in reaching Kjell before the feast began, in warning him before the poisoned bread could do its work. "You'll never succeed," she said, playing for time as she edged sideways, seeking any opening. "Even if I die here, others will see through your plot." "Others?" Gunnar advanced slowly, his knife weaving a deadly pattern before him. "Who? Thorvald, consumed by grief for his wife? The warriors, too busy searching for a killer who doesn't exist? The villagers, who already whisper that you brought this curse upon us with your foreign ways and strange rituals?" Each word struck like a physical blow, highlighting her isolation within the clan, the very vulnerability Gunnar had exploited in his plan. She was the perfect scapegoat precisely because she stood apart, connected to the clan but never truly of it. "The gods will reveal the truth," she insisted, though even to her own ears the words sounded hollow and desperate. "The gods are silent, Volva, as you will be." He struck again, faster this time, the knife slicing through the fabric of her sleeve and drawing a line of fire across her arm. Hildr cried out, more in shock than pain, stumbling backward until her shoulders hit the rough wooden wall. In that moment of vulnerability, Leif darted forward, his small blade aimed at her side. Instinct more than conscious thought guided Hildr's response. She swung her staff in a wide arc, catching the boy across the chest with enough force to send him sprawling. The momentary advantage was all she needed. Pushing off from the wall, Hildr bolted past Gunnar, her feet finding sure purchase on the packed earth floor, despite her racing heart and the blood now soaking her sleeve. "Stop her!" Gunnar's roar followed her down the corridor, but Hildr did not look back. She burst into the main hall, where preparations for the feast were in their final stages.
Servants moved between tables, warriors gathered in conversational groups, and at the high table, Kjell sat with his closest advisers, unaware of the death that awaited him. "Jarl Kjell!" Hildra's voice cut through the ambient noise of the hall, drawing all eyes to her disheveled figure. "The bread is poisoned. Gunnar seeks your death." For a heartbeat, silence gripped the hall as her words registered. Then chaos erupted. Warriors reached for weapons, women gasped and drew back, and Kjell rose from his seat, his face darkening with confusion and anger.
"What madness is this, Volva?" he demanded, even as his hand moved instinctively to his sword. Before Hildr could respond, Gunnar emerged from the corridor behind her, his expression composed, his knife nowhere to be seen. "Indeed, what madness! Our Volva appears to have lost her mind, Jarl. She attacked me in your private chambers, raving about poison and conspiracies." Doubt flickered across the faces of those gathered. Hildr was painfully aware of how she must appear, wild-eyed, bleeding, making accusations against Kjell's most trusted advisor. "He lies," she cried, desperation giving her voice a shrill edge that did nothing to enhance her credibility. "Gunnar and the boy, they plotted your death. I heard them speak of it." "What boy?" Kjell's eyes narrowed. "The stranger you've been hiding?" The trap closed around her with those words. Gunnar's smile was subtle but triumphant. "So you admit it? You've harbored an enemy within our walls?" Hildr felt the ground shifting beneath her, the carefully constructed plot revealing itself in all its deadly brilliance. Every action she had taken, from rescuing Leifr to investigating Sigrid's death, had been anticipated and incorporated into Gunnar's scheme. "The boy is his tool," she said, gesturing toward Gunnar with her bloodied arm, "sent to infiltrate our clan and assist in your murder. Sigrid discovered their plan. That's why she had to die."
Murmurs ran through the gathered crowd, uncertainty warring with suspicion. Kjell's gaze moved from Hildr to Gunnar, weighing, assessing. "These are serious accusations, Volva. Where is this boy now? Bring him forward as witness." "He was just there, in the corridor with Gunnar," Hildr insisted, turning to point. But the corridor behind her was empty. Leif had vanished, no doubt through some prearranged escape route. Gunnar spread his hands in a gesture of injured innocence. "As you can see, Jarl, there is no boy, only the ravings of a woman who has spent too long communing with spirits and not enough time among her own people." The crowd's mood was shifting, sympathy for Gunnar rising as doubt about Hildr grew. She could feel her chance slipping away with each passing moment. In desperation, she strode to the high table, ignoring the warriors who moved to intercept her. "If you doubt my words, then test them. The ritual bread prepared for you. Have someone else taste it first." A dangerous light entered Kjell's eyes. "You suggest I use one of my people as a taster, like some fearful southern king?" "I will taste it myself," Hildr declared, reaching for the ceremonial loaf that sat on a wooden platter at the center of the high table. "If I speak falsely, let the poison take me instead." Her hand closed around the bread, but before she could lift it to her lips, Gunnar lunged forward with unexpected speed. "No!" The involuntary cry damned him more surely than any accusation could have. Kjell's gaze sharpened, his hand falling to his sword hilt once more. "Why so concerned, blood brother? Let the Volva taste the bread if she wishes." Gunnar's composure cracked, his eyes darting between the bread in Hildr's hand and the increasingly suspicious faces surrounding him. "She seeks to trick you, Jarl. The bread is not poisoned. She means to prove her innocence with a harmless act, then strike when your guard is lowered." "A simple test will reveal the truth," Hildr said, breaking off a piece of the bread. The eyes of everyone in the hall were fixed upon her as she raised it to her lips. "Stop her!" Gunnar's control finally shattered. He drew his knife and lunged toward Hildr, confirming his guilt more effectively than any confession. Warriors moved instantly, intercepting him before he could reach her. Strong hands grabbed his arms, forcing the knife from his grip. Gunnar fought like a cornered wolf, his face contorted with rage and desperation. "The boy!" he shouted. "Find the boy! He has the antidote!" Kell rose from his seat, his expression terrible in its controlled fury. "So, there is a boy, and the bread is poisoned." He turned to his warriors. "Search the village. Find this child Gunnar speaks of." Hildr carefully set down the piece of bread, her hand trembling slightly with the knowledge of how close she had come to death. "His name is Life. He bears a wooden reliquary around his neck, identical to the one Gunnar wears. I believe it contains the antidote he speaks of." Kell nodded to his warriors, who departed immediately to begin the search. Others maintained their grip on Gunnar, who had ceased struggling, but whose eyes burned with hatred as they fixed on Hildr. "You've ruined everything," he hissed. "Years of planning, destroyed by a woman who should have minded her rituals and stayed blind to the world of men." "The gods guided my sight," Hildr replied, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "They showed me what you sought to hide." Kell approached Gunnar slowly, his massive frame seeming to block out the light from the hall's central fire. "Why, blood brother? What drove you to this betrayal?" For a moment it seemed Gunnar would maintain his silence. Then a bitter laugh escaped him. "Why? Because you are weak, Kell. You cling to old ways, old alliances, when we should be expanding, conquering." "The gods guided my sight," Hildr replied, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "They showed me what you sought to hide." Kell approached Gunnar slowly, his massive frame seeming to block out the light from the hall's central fire. "Why, blood brother? What drove you to this betrayal?" For a moment it seemed Gunnar would maintain his silence. Then a bitter laugh escaped him. "Why? Because you are weak, Kell. You cling to old ways, old alliances, when we should be expanding, conquering."
The Ravenkell clan was just the beginning. With their warriors added to ours, we could have dominated all the northern fjords. At what cost? How many of our own would die in these conquests? "Those who fall in battle find their way to Valhalla," Gunnar spat. "Better that than growing old and weak, watching our power dwindle while other clans grow strong." Kell studied him for a long moment, sorrow and rage warring in his expression. "And Sigrid, what threat did she pose to your ambitions?" A flicker of something, regret perhaps, crossed Gunnar's face before his features hardened once more. "She saw Life entering the village. The boy told me she had questioned him, threatened to go to you. I could not allow that." The admission brought gasps from those gathered. Thorvald, standing nearby, let out a roar of grief and rage, lunging toward Gunnar, only to be restrained by his fellow warriors. "Take him to the holding pit," Kell commanded, his voice thick with disgust. "He will face judgment when the council gathers." As Gunnar was dragged away, still hurling threats and accusations, a commotion at the hall's entrance drew all eyes. 2 warriors entered, between them the struggling form of Life. The boy's cold calculation had given way to childish terror, his face streaked with tears, his small body trembling as he was brought before Kell. "We found him trying to flee through the southern gate, Jarl," one warrior reported. "He carried this." He held up the wooden reliquary that had hung around the boy's neck.
Kjell took the small container, examining it carefully before turning to Hildr. "Can you determine if this contains the antidote Gunnar spoke of?" Hildr approached cautiously, taking the reliquary in her hands. It was warm from the boy's body, the wood smooth and polished, carved with tiny runes that spoke of protection and healing. Opening it revealed a small amount of pale powder, a substance she recognized from her training in healing herbs.
"It's valerian root mixed with other herbs," she confirmed. "Not an antidote, but an agent to induce sleep. He likely planned to drug the guards after Gunnar took control." Kjell's expression darkened further. He turned to the boy, who had ceased struggling, and now stood with his head bowed, defeat evident in every line of his small body. "Look at me, child," the Jarl commanded, his voice gentler than expected. Life raised his head slowly, revealing eyes red from tears, but still defiant. "Kill me if you must," he said in his broken Norse. "I am not afraid to die." "How old are you, boy?" The question seemed to surprise Life. He hesitated before answering. 8 winters. "And how came you to serve Gunnar in this plot?" Life's gaze dropped once more. "He is my father's brother. When your warriors raided our village last summer, my parents were killed. Gunnar found me hiding and recognized me. He said I could help avenge my family if I did exactly as he instructed." The revelation sent murmurs through the hall. Gunnar's connection to the Ravenkill clan had been unknown, a secret he had kept even from Kjell, his blood brother and Jarl. "And did you know what would happen to the Jarl if he ate the bread?" Hildr asked gently. Life nodded, a single tear tracking down his dirty face. "Uncle said it would be a quick death, that no one would suffer." His voice broke. "He promised no one else would die." "But Sigrid died," Hildr said softly. "She saw you, didn't she? Recognized that you didn't belong." Another nod, more tears falling. "I didn't know he would hurt her. I swear by the gods I didn't know." The boy's distress seemed genuine, his manipulation by Gunnar evident in every word and gesture. Hildr felt the same compassion that had led her to rescue him from the forest, though now tinged with wariness, born of betrayal. Kjell sighed heavily, the weight of leadership evident in the slump of his powerful shoulders. "The boy is too young to bear full responsibility for his actions. He will remain in the village under guard until the council decides his fate." As the warriors led Leifr away, his small face turned back once toward Hildr, a complex mixture of emotions crossing his features: apology, fear, and something that might have been gratitude for her intervention despite everything. The hall gradually emptied as the feast was postponed and the clan dispersed to digest the day's shocking events. Soon only Kjell and Hildr remained, standing before the high table where the poisoned bread still lay, a symbol of how close death had come. "You saved my life today, Volva," Kjell said at last, breaking the heavy silence. "Despite our differences, despite my suspicion of you." Hildr inclined her head in acknowledgement. "I serve the clan, Jarl, as do you. Perhaps we have both forgotten that at times." He studied her with new respect in his grey eyes. "The gods chose well when they marked you as Volva." "The gods' ways are not always clear to us," Hildr replied. "But today they guided my steps when I might have faltered." Kjell nodded thoughtfully. "Rest now, tend your wound. Tomorrow the council will convene to judge Gunnar and decide the boy's fate. Your voice will be needed." As Hildr made her way back to her cabin through the silent snow-covered village, she felt the weight of the day's events pressing upon her.
the betrayal, the violence, the narrow escape from death, all of it swirled in her mind like leaves caught in a whirlwind. Yet beneath the chaos lay a strange sense of purpose, as if the gods had indeed guided her through this trial for reasons not yet fully revealed. She had been tested and had not been found wanting. Inside her cabin, the fire had burned low, casting long shadows across the familiar space. Hildr tended to her wounded arm, washing away the dried blood and applying a healing salve before binding it with clean linen.
The physical pain was minimal compared to the emotional turmoil of the day. She thought of Leif, a child used as a weapon by those who should have protected him. Despite his betrayal, she could not bring herself to hate him. In his desperate attempt to please his uncle, to avenge family he barely remembered, she recognized a loneliness that mirrored her own. The following morning dawned clear and bright, the sun reflecting blindingly off the snow-covered landscape. Hildr dressed with care in her formal vulva garments, a dark blue dress with ritual symbols embroidered along the hem, her wolf pelt cape secured with silver brooches, her hair braided and adorned with small bone beads. Around her neck hung the amulet of Odin, and at her belt a pouch containing rune sticks for divination. The council gathered in the great hall, 12 elders seated in a semicircle with Kjell at the center. Before them stood Gunnar, his hands bound, his face a mask of defiance, despite a night spent in the cold holding pit. To one side, guarded but unbound, stood Leif, looking small and lost in the vast space. Hildr took her place to Kjell's right, the position according to her the respect due to her role as vulva. The hall was crowded with clan members, all eager to witness the judgment of a traitor, an event unprecedented in living memory. Gunnar Hraftson, Kjell began, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. You stand accused of conspiracy against your Jarl, of the murder of Sigrid Thorvald's wife, and of bringing an enemy into our midst with intent to do harm. How do you answer these charges? Gunnar lifted his chin, his eyes cold. I acted for the good of the clan, though you are too blind to see it. Under my leadership, we would have grown strong, feared throughout the north. Instead, we stagnate, growing soft while our enemies multiply. So you admit your guilt? I admit to having vision where you have none.
Gunnar's gaze swept the council, seeking support that was not forthcoming. History will judge which of us truly betrayed our people. Murmurs ran through the gathered crowd, quickly silenced by Kjell's raised hand. And the boy? What of your sister's son, whom you used as your instrument? For the first time, Gunnar's composure faltered. He glanced at Leif, something like regret crossing his features. The boy did as he was told. The responsibility is mine alone. It was as close to mercy as Gunnar was capable of showing. This attempt to shield his nephew from the consequences of their shared actions. Hildr noted the gesture, filing it away as evidence that even in the darkest heart, some small light might remain. Velva, Kjell turned to Hildr. What say the gods in this matter? What justice do they demand? All eyes turned to her, expectant. This was the moment when her role transcended that of witness or accuser. Now she spoke with the authority granted by the gods themselves. Hildr rose, her staff in hand, and approached the center of the council circle. From her belt pouch she drew the rune sticks, holding them before her in cupped palms. The gods see all truths, even those we hide from ourselves, she intoned, her voice taking on the rhythmic cadence used in ritual. They weigh not only the deed, but the intention, not only the wound, but the healing that follows. She cast the runesticks upon the floor, where they scattered in a pattern that only she could interpret. Kneeling, she studied them intently, her fingers hovering above each carved symbol as she read the message they contained. For Gunnar Rafnesson, the gods show no mercy, she announced, rising to her feet. His actions were born of pride and ambition, not love for his clan. The blood he has shed cries out for justice. Gunnar's face remained impassive, though a muscle twitched in his jaw. He had expected no less.
For the boy, Leifr, the gods speak differently, Hildr continued, turning toward the child. They see one led astray, used as a tool by those who should have guided him toward honor. They offer a path to redemption, though it will not be easily walked. Relief visibly washed over Leifr's small frame, his shoulders sagging as the tension that had held him rigid began to release. The god's wisdom guides us, Kjell acknowledged. The council will now decide. The deliberation was brief. For Gunnar, the sentence was death, not by the sword, which would honor him as a warrior, but by hanging, the fate of traitors and oath-breakers. For Leifr, a different path. He would remain in the village as a servant in Kjell's household, neither slave nor free, until he had proven his loyalty to the clan that now reluctantly claimed him. As the sentences were pronounced, Hildr watched the faces of the condemned. Gunnar received his fate with the stoic dignity expected of a Norse warrior, though hatred still burned in his eyes when they fell upon her. Leifr's expression was more complex. Fear mingled with relief, grief with a cautious hope. The execution took place that afternoon, at the edge of the forest where the land fell away to reveal the fjord below. The entire clan gathered to witness justice being done, their faces solemn in the winter light. Hildr stood apart, her role not to participate, but to observe, to ensure that the god's will was properly carried out. Gunnar spoke no final words, made no plea for mercy or forgiveness. He met death as he had lived, proudly, defiantly, his gaze fixed on some distant horizon, as if already seeing the halls of his ancestors. When it was done, his body was left for the ravens, denied the honor of a proper burial. As the clan dispersed, returning to the village and the interrupted routines of daily life, Hildr remained behind, watching as the last light of day painted the snow-covered landscape in hues of gold and crimson.
The events of the past days had changed something fundamental within her, shaken her isolation, forced her to engage with the clan in ways she had long avoided. A small figure approached hesitantly, Leif, now dressed in clean clothing that marked him as a household servant, his fair hair washed and his face scrubbed clean of dirt and tears. "The Jarl said I might speak with you," he said softly, his accent still thick, but his words more confident than before. "If you wish it." Hildr studied him, seeing past the deception to the child beneath. Wounded, manipulated, yet still capable of change. "What would you say to me, Leif?" He swallowed hard, his small hands twisting nervously together. "I am sorry for the lies, for using your kindness against you." His voice wavered but steadied as he continued. "Uncle Gunnar said a Volva has no true feelings, that you would help me only because the gods commanded it. But I sought truth in your eyes when you found me in the forest, real concern, not just duty." The observation was surprisingly perceptive for one so young. Hildr felt something shift within her chest, a softening toward this child who had seen through her carefully maintained facade to the woman beneath. "The gods guide my actions," she acknowledged, "but they do not replace my heart. I helped you because you needed help, life. That has not changed." Relief washed over his face. "Then might I still visit you sometimes? The Jarl says I must learn your language properly and the ways of this clan. But the other children fear me, and the adults watch me as if I might turn into a wolf at any moment." Hildr found herself smiling, a rare expression that felt strange on her face. "You may visit. Perhaps you can help me gather herbs when spring comes. I will teach you which are for healing and which for ritual." The boy's answering smile transformed his face, revealing the child he might have been without the shadow of Gunnar's manipulation.
"I would like that, Volva." "Hildr," she corrected gently. "When we are alone, you may call me Hildr." As they walked back toward the village together, the first stars appearing in the darkening sky above, Hildr felt the presence of the gods more strongly than she had in many years. Not as distant observers or demanding masters, but as guides who had led her through darkness toward an unexpected light. The winter would be long, the challenges many, but something had changed within the clan and within herself. A secret had been revealed, a conspiracy unmasked, but in its place new bonds had formed, fragile yet promising, like the first green shoots that would eventually emerge from beneath the snow. In the silence of the gathering night, beneath the vast canopy of stars that the Norse knew as the roof of Odin's hall, a single thought crystallized in Hild's mind. True strength lies not in isolation or in power over others, but in the courage to reach across divides of fear and suspicion, to offer compassion where others would turn away. It was a lesson the gods had taught her through trial and danger, one she would not soon forget. That night, as the village slept under its blanket of snow and stars, Hildr stood outside her cabin, staff in hand, her eyes raised to the heavens. The aurora danced across the northern sky, ribbons of green and blue light weaving patterns that seemed to echo the runes of her divination. "I hear you," she whispered to the gods, to the ancestors, to the wind that carried her words away into the vast darkness. "I understand now what you would have me learn." And for the first time in many years, Hild Eriksdottir, Volva of the Skaldarsson clan, felt not the burden of her isolation, but the strength of her connection to all things, a thread in the great tapestry of life that the Norns themselves continued to weave with their ageless, knowing hands. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to discover more secrets of the Viking world.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe. We're just getting started and we really need your support. And may the gods grant you a legendary life.